You didn't end up here by accident. Something about this exact video stopped your scroll, and I think part of you already knows why. You've been quiet for a while, not sad exactly, just tired in a specific way that's hard to explain to people who haven't lived it. You've shown up for everyone else, held things together for your family, your friends, your work, while your own life has felt like it's sitting in a waiting room nobody else can see. Maybe it's shown up as watching everyone around you move forward while you stay in the exact same place. Weddings you've attended as the one always standing alone at the edge of the reception. Group chats that used to include you slowly going quiet on your end because you got tired of having nothing new to share. Nights where you've done the math on how long it's actually been since something in your life felt like it was moving, and the number surprised you in a way that hurt more than you expected. Maybe you've wondered more than once whether you got left behind somehow, whether everyone else found their person, their people, their season, while you're still standing in the same quiet hallway, doing everything right and getting nothing back that looks like progress. You've prayed about it, you've tried to be patient about it. Some nights that patience has felt like strength, and other nights it's felt like you're just quietly losing a fight nobody else even knows you're in. Here's the one thing I want you to sit with before we go any further. What feels like being forgotten might actually be something closer to being kept. Not punished, kept. Stay with me to the end, because everything I walk through builds towards something real. And if any part of this lands somewhere true in you, there's more waiting in the description below. Someone close to you is standing in that exact hallway right now, close to giving up on their own waiting room, and they might need this before tonight is over. You might not even know which person it is yet. Keep them in mind as we go, because by the end, you'll probably have a name. Let's start at the beginning. 1. Isolation can be positioning, not abandonment. Galatians 6:9 says, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." That phrase, proper time, in the Greek is kairos, not chronos. Chronos is just clock time, the ticking, measurable kind, the kind you can count on a calendar and get frustrated watching. Kairos is a specific, appointed moment, the right one, not just any one, the kind that arrives fully formed rather than being rushed into existence early. Paul isn't promising a harvest whenever you get impatient enough to demand it. He's promising it at the appointed time, the one already fixed, whether or not it matches your timeline, whether or not it arrives on the schedule you would have picked for yourself if anyone had asked. That distinction matters more than it sounds like it should. Most of the exhaustion in a long wait doesn't actually come from the waiting itself. It comes from measuring an appointed kairos kind of timeline against an impatient chronos kind of clock, and feeling like a failure every time the two don't match up. They were never going to match up. They're not even the same kind of measurement. Think about Elijah in 1 Kings chapter 17. God tells him plainly, "Go, hide yourself by the Kerith Ravine, east of the Jordan, and I've directed the ravens to feed you there." Read that again. Hide yourself. Not build a platform, not gather a following, not network his way into relevance during a national famine. Just sit by a drying brook, alone, and let an unnatural supply line find him there, morning and evening, without fail. To anyone watching from outside, it would have looked like Elijah had disappeared into irrelevance while the rest of the country scrambled to survive. It wasn't a demotion. It was a hiding place with a very specific address, and the ravens knew exactly where to look. Notice too what the brook eventually does. It dries up. The provision that seemed so reliable runs out right in the middle of the hiding season, and Elijah has to trust the next instruction instead of assuming the first provision was the whole plan. That's usually how waiting seasons actually work. The first form of provision or comfort you're given isn't always the permanent one. Sometimes it's just enough to get you to the next instruction. And the drying up isn't abandonment either. It's just the next page of the same story. So here's the honest question. What if your quiet season isn't proof that you've been forgotten, but proof that you're currently at the one address the provision already knows how to find? And what if the parts of this season that feel like they're drying up aren't endings, but just the next page, turning? 2. Sometimes you're being noticed exactly while you think no one's looking. Ruth, chapter 2, tells the story of a woman with almost nothing working in her favor. She was a foreigner, a widow, working in the back of someone else's field, picking up whatever the harvesters left behind. She had no name in that town, no family network, no way to engineer her own rescue. She didn't dress differently or make a show of her situation to attract attention. She just kept showing up, working with integrity day after day in a field that wasn't even hers. And then Boaz walks in from Bethlehem, and before he even speaks to her, he asks his foreman one question. Whose young woman is that? He wasn't there by coincidence. Her steadiness had already reached his ears before he ever set foot in that field. The tracking wasn't built on her effort to be seen. It was built on someone else's attention, finding her exactly where she already was. I think about how easy it would have been for Ruth to give up on integrity in that field. Nobody would have noticed if she'd cut corners, complained loudly, or spent her energy resenting her circumstances instead of just doing the work in front of her well. The text doesn't record a single dramatic moment where she does something impressive to earn attention. It just records ordinary faithfulness, day after day, in a field that offered her nothing guaranteed in return. If you've been quietly doing the right thing in a season nobody's clapping for, that's not wasted. That's usually exactly the kind of steadiness that gets noticed by the people who matter, later than you'd like, but not never. The version of you that keeps choosing integrity in an unglamorous season is usually the exact version somebody ends up asking about, long before you know they're asking. It's worth noticing, too, that Ruth wasn't waiting for Boaz specifically. She had no idea he existed as an option when she chose that field, on the advice of her mother-in-law, simply because it seemed like a reasonable, safe place to work. She wasn't positioning herself for a specific outcome. She was just being faithful with the actual decision in front of her, one ordinary choice at a time. The specific rescue arrived through a door she wasn't watching, in a form she couldn't have predicted, which tends to be exactly how this works more often than not. 3. Standing in the gap is its own kind of waiting. There's a hard verse in Ezekiel 22:30. God says he looked for someone who would stand in the gap on behalf of the land so it wouldn't be destroyed, and found no one. That word gap there pictures an actual breach in a city wall, the kind that leaves everyone inside exposed. Someone was supposed to stand there. Nobody did. Esther's story runs almost the opposite direction. She spends an entire season in preparation, hidden away, not in control of her own timeline, before she ever gets near a position to actually do anything. 12 months of preparation before she even meets the king. Months she had no say over. Months that must have felt endless and strange, disconnected from any obvious purpose. And when the moment finally comes, when her cousin Mordecai tells her that maybe she was placed there for such a time as this, she doesn't get to skip the waiting to arrive at the purpose. The waiting was the positioning. Without the quiet years first, there's no version of the story where she's ready for the one night that mattered. If you've been holding a place in a family, a friendship, a prayer for someone who hasn't changed yet, that's not nothing. Some gaps only get filled by people who were willing to stand in them long before anyone applauded it. Think about how invisible that kind of holding usually feels while it's happening. Nobody throws a celebration for the person who kept praying for a prodigal relative for a decade, or the friend who kept showing up for someone who couldn't reciprocate yet, or the person who kept believing something would shift long after it stopped being convenient to believe it. That invisibility isn't a sign the holding didn't matter. It's usually just what holding a gap actually looks like from the outside, unremarkable until it isn't. 4. An honest guardrail before we go further. I want to pause here because this is exactly where a message like this can quietly turn into something unhealthy if I'm not careful. This isn't permission to sit at home doing nothing and call it faith. Waiting well doesn't mean refusing therapy, avoiding community, skipping the hard work of actually building a life and real friendships around you. It doesn't mean treating every closed door as some grand spiritual test while ignoring practical wisdom, like being honest about your own patterns in relationships or actually widening your circle instead of only scrolling and hoping. It also doesn't mean fixating on one specific person you're hoping will suddenly appear, checking your phone every hour, or deciding your whole worth hinges on someone finding you by a certain date. If this message has you spiraling into more anxiety instead of more peace, that's the wrong takeaway. The point isn't to wait passively and do nothing. It's to stop treating your current quiet season as proof that you're disqualified, while you keep doing the ordinary, healthy things in front of you. I want to say this plainly, because I think it matters more than the rest of this section. If your loneliness has gone on long enough that it's affecting your sleep, your eating, your ability to function day to day, that's worth talking to an actual professional about, not just praying through alone in silence. Faith and practical support were never meant to compete with each other. Ruth still had to show up to that field every single day. Esther still had to go through months of very real, very practical preparation. Waiting well has always included doing the next right thing in front of you, not just sitting still and hoping something eventually changes on its own. There's also a version of this message people sometimes use to avoid necessary change. If a specific relationship or friendship has been genuinely unhealthy, this isn't a call to keep holding a gap for someone who's actively harming you. Standing in a gap and staying in harm's way are two completely different things, and it takes real discernment, sometimes with outside help from a counselor or a trusted friend, to tell them apart, honestly. This message is about not despairing over an ordinary, painful season of loneliness. It was never meant to be a reason to stay somewhere unsafe. 5. Readiness matters more than performance. Luke chapter 15 tells the story most people know as the prodigal son. But the father's part of it gets skipped past too quickly. He doesn't chase his son into the far country. He doesn't send letters lecturing him about his choices. But he also doesn't lock the gate, sell the room, or take the boy's name off the family ledger. Every evening, the text implies, he's out there watching the road. And because he stayed ready without resentment, the moment his son hit the end of himself and turned around, the road home was already open. No lecture waiting at the door, just a father already running toward him, robe and ring already prepared, as if he'd been rehearsing that exact moment for longer than anyone realized. Think about what it would have cost that father to stay soft during all those months of silence. It would have been so much easier, so much more understandable even, to harden. To decide the boy made his choice and now has to live with it. To stop watching the road because watching it every evening and seeing nothing was its own quiet grief, repeated daily. Instead, the text shows a man who kept his eyes on the horizon anyway, who kept the household ready anyway, who apparently never let the wait talk him into giving up his hope. Maybe the posture that actually matters in your waiting isn't proving your worth to anyone. It's staying soft enough, ready enough, that when the door does open, you're not too hardened by the wait to walk through it. Bitterness has a way of arriving quietly during long waits. And it's worth checking in with yourself honestly about whether it's been creeping in without you fully noticing. The father in that story didn't get to skip the pain of waiting. He just refused to let the pain calcify into something that would have kept him from running when it mattered. You are not disqualified by how quiet this season has been. You are not behind schedule. You are not the only person who has ever wondered, honestly, if they'd been overlooked by whatever's supposed to be coming next. Ruth didn't know Boaz was coming while she worked that field. Esther didn't know which night would matter while she sat through the ordinary ones. The waiting rarely announces itself as meaningful while it's happening. It usually only makes sense looking backward. You are someone who has kept showing up in a season that hasn't rewarded you with any visible proof yet that showing up matters. That's a specific, quiet kind of strength that doesn't get much credit in real time. Most people around you have no idea what it's actually costing you to stay soft, stay hopeful, stay faithful in the small things, while your own story feels stalled. That effort isn't invisible to God, even on the nights it feels completely invisible to everyone else, including yourself. Let's bring this to God together, honestly, exactly as you are tonight. Father, I'm not coming to you pretending this waiting has been easy. You already know the specific nights I've wondered if I'd been forgotten, the specific silence that's been harder to carry than I've let anyone see. Thank you that being unseen by people isn't the same as being unseen by you. Help me hold this season with honesty instead of either despair or pretending, like Elijah at that drying brook, not building a platform out of desperation, just staying where I actually am and trusting the supply line I can't fully explain. I think about Ruth in that field, and Esther in that long season of preparation, and the father who stayed at the gate without bitterness. And I want to carry this waiting the way they did, steady, honest, without shrinking and without pretending I don't feel the weight of it some nights. Help me tell the difference between healthy hope and anxious fixation. I don't want to build a whole story around one person or one outcome and lose myself in the waiting for it. Help me keep doing the ordinary good things in front of me, showing up for the people already in my life, building real community instead of just waiting for a rescue to arrive. I want to be honest about the bitterness that's tried to creep in on the harder nights, the moments I've compared my life to people who seem to have it easier, the resentment that's crept in when I've watched things move for everyone except me. I don't want that bitterness to calcify into something that makes me hard to reach when the door finally does open. Soften whatever's gotten hard in me during this wait, gently, without shame attached to it. Help me hold my own story loosely enough that I'm not gripping it out of fear, but tightly enough that I don't give up on it out of exhaustion either. That's a harder balance than it sounds like, and I know I can't manage it on willpower alone. For the person I thought of while watching this, the one close to giving up on their own waiting room tonight, reach them too, even before I get the chance to send this their way. Let them feel, even for a moment, that their quiet season hasn't gone unnoticed. Thank you for the quiet seasons that don't make sense yet. Help me trust that they're not wasted, even on the nights they feel like it. In the name of Jesus, Amen. If any part of this found you tonight, don't just scroll past it. Think of one person in your life who's been quiet for a while, someone who might be closer to giving up than they've said out loud. Send this their way. You might be the reason they hold on one more season. You don't need a sign tonight to know what to do next. Keep showing up to the ordinary things in front of you tomorrow morning. Keep being honest with the people who've earned your honesty. Keep praying through the nights that don't make sense yet, even when it feels like you're talking into an empty room. Seasons like this rarely announce when they're ending. Most people only recognize the turn once they're already a few steps past it, looking back and realizing the waiting had actually been building towards something the whole time. Rest well tonight, not because the waiting is over, but because you're not carrying it as if you're the only one holding it anymore.